You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another emergency offseason podcast here on Saturday afternoon as Indiana got another commitment from the transfer portal today as Anthony Walker, a 6'9" big grad transfer from Miami. He was there for the final game Indiana played last season, and he will be there for the first game Indiana plays next season as he took an official visit this weekend and then immediately committed to Indiana. As a lot of us kind of started to expect, there were lots of positive vibes around this recruitment and this official visit, and Anthony made it official this weekend. That brings Indiana now to 11 scholarships filled, adds some front court depth, as we will discuss, and really doesn't take away from Indiana's pursuit of a couple of scoring wings, as we know that they need. But we've convened this emergency podcast here, as we always do, or at least always try to do, to kind of put this recruitment in context, what we know about this player. And Coach Tonsoni is here. We'll see if anybody else shows up. I sent everyone the link, but sometimes on these weekend ones, it's a little difficult because folks are scattered around. But I think the first thing to understand about this commitment is, if you take a look at Anthony's stats, you just kind of look at what he's done over 4 years, it's easy to look at that and be a little bit underwhelmed. And so I think if Anthony Walker, if Indiana didn't have a commitment from Kalel Ware, didn't have a commitment from Peyton Sparks, and you're looking at Anthony Walker as a guy who's going to be expected to come in and, replace some of the production from Trace Jackson Davis, replace some of the production from Race Thompson, he wouldn't really be able to do that. And I can get feeling a little bit underwhelmed about that. But the thing to understand is Indiana does have Kalel Ware, and Indiana does have Peyton Sparks, and Indiana, of course, has Malik Renew. And so Anthony Walker is a guy that this coaching staff is bringing in to add front court depth. Because as deep as that seems with those three guys and a Caleb Banks who can slide down to the 4, we only need to look to last season to understand how a deep position can become thin very quickly due to injury. And so Anthony Walker is here to do that. And it's going to be difficult to, find a guy to come in and, take a role like that where it's not a starting role, and it's not even maybe a featured role off of the bench. Indiana had a recruitment of Jalen DeLoach from VCU. He ended up going elsewhere, and that's probably a reason why. Anthony Walker is a guy who played, 26 minutes a game as a sophomore, had his most statistically productive season as a sophomore on a very bad Miami team. The last 2 seasons, he's played more of a complementary role. I think 14 minutes per game as a junior, something like 10 minutes per game last year, but on teams that were very good. And, his efficiency numbers, not great. We'll talk about that. His counting stats, not great. But he was a guy who was able to come in, be a big athlete, play defense, provide depth on teams that made NCAA tournament runs. And that is what Indiana is looking for him to do, as well as, with a 4-year guy, a grad transfer who's been a part of winning teams. We've talked about this. Indiana's having to replace a lot of veteran leadership. And so getting veteran voices in there who have been around college basketball, who have made deep tournament runs, I think there's value there. And there's value in having a guy like Anthony Walker who can be an important practice player. If you have Kalel Ware and Malik Renew starting, now you've got Peyton Sparks on the second unit. Who else is there with size that's really going to, challenge those guys? You could say Caleb Banks, but you also want Caleb playing some 3. So Anthony Walker is a guy who comes in and gives you that depth in practice too, which is also really important, for a guy that's kind of on his place, kind of in the pecking order, which is probably in the 8th, 9th, 10th, spot in terms of how many minutes he will get. So, I understand you look at the numbers, it's like, I don't know that this makes a ton of sense, and we already have bigs, but I think when you peel back the onion a little bit and kind of figure out what the coaching staff's vision for this player is, I think it starts to make a little more sense. And really, he becomes an important piece of kind of completing the overall piece of this puzzle. Even if he's not a headliner, I think there's still a lot of value that he's going to be able to bring to Indiana this year in his final go-around in college basketball. So with that said, let me bring in Brian Tonsoni, the coach, who was at the baseball game, but unfortunately the baseball game wasn't going so well, so he pieced out early, and he's able to be here for us on the emergency pod. Coach, be careful. We hear police sirens in the background. But what are your initial thoughts on Anthony Walker's commitment?
Yeah, that was an ambulance heading in another direction, so we're okay. I just think it's a depth piece, and it's a kind of kid who has played well for a winning program, is willing to just role. We hear, and you need that fourth post player. I know everyone wants wings, and we're excited about getting the wings, and we're maybe nervous about getting the wings. But last year we had 5 post players, or at least with Geronimo. Now we only had 3, and an injury or foul trouble. To have people ready to play, and what better than to have Anthony Walker, who's played on winning programs and is a veteran player.
Yep. Hey, Coach, let's turn your video off. It does seem like it was impacting your audio a little bit. So we'll try it. Yeah, we'll try it with the audio off and see if that goes well. So just to summarize, as you said, he is a depth piece. What role do you see him playing as we go through this season? I know a lot of people have looked at it and basically said, hey, this is a guy who's essentially, replacing, the Jordan Geronimo role, kind of, where Geronimo was a depth piece and, would play a few minutes here and there in games, got some more run when Indiana had injuries. We remember when Race Thompson was out and he stepped in and played. Do you kind of see a similar role for Anthony this season for Indiana?
Yeah, I think he is either the third or fourth post off the bench. He and Sparks will be behind Ware and Renew, and he will get the 10 to 12, maybe 10 to 15-minute play as needed. We know Renew had trouble with the fouls last year and staying on the floor, and hopefully he'll fix that this year. But just in case, you got a veteran presence there ready to come in off the bench. But that's the role. I see him as a third or fourth post player off the bench.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, like you said, I mean, you've got the injury concerns that are, they're just always there. I mean, that's why you want to build depth. Malik has been a guy who's had foul trouble. And so, now you've got another option because with Peyton Sparks is a particular type of player. He's a back-to-the-basket scorer, and he's a guy who can play post defense. But I don't think you're getting a whole lot of defense out on the floor from Peyton Sparks, at least based on what we've seen, from him at Ball State. Maybe he can make improvements, but that's the type of player he is. And I think, we obviously talked a lot about Peyton Sparks. We're all excited about him. I think there are going to be particular matchups where, especially against backup bigs of the opponent, where you can put Peyton Sparks in there. And I mean, this is a guy who can score in the post. He can go get you buckets. Anthony Walker is not that type of a guy. But he's a different type of player in that I think he's going to be a little bit more versatile, defensively. So just based on the matchup, there may be certain games where it's better for Walker to be in there. There may be other games where it's better for Sparks to be in there. And if you watch Walker, if you want to kind of get a flavor for how he plays, at least in what I've seen of him, haven't seen a whole lot of back to the basket scoring. He's a guy that from his statistical profile, clearly wants to be a guy who plays out on the floor. You look at his season-by-season numbers. As a freshman, he took 19 threes. As a sophomore, he took 64. As a junior, he took 34. And last year, he took 24. Now, he has not been particularly efficient in any of those seasons. Last year, he was 3 of 24 from 3. The year before, he was 8 of 34. So he is a 20% three-point shooter for his career, but clearly is a guy who is willing and wants to take them. And that's what you see offensively. He does like to face up. I think when you watch his tape, you do see some examples of, him being able to drive and get into the basket or get to the basket, get into the paint and score. It's a little awkward. It's a little herky-jerky, and his turnover rate's about 15%, so he will, give the ball up some. But that's where, Coach, I think when, one of the things that we're seeing develop with this roster is different types of players who can allow you to put, different 5-man units out there that can play differently. And so I think that's the other, part of this where I think when you start peeling back the onion, you see the vision a little bit. This is not going to be a guy who's going to stuff the stat sheet, but he does give you a different look off the bench than Peyton Sparks, depending on who you're playing. And I do think that there is some value there. I think his history at Miami shows, he played 63.4% of the minutes as a sophomore, and that was not a very good team. Miami's two teams the last couple of years have been more perimeter-oriented, clearly better. I mean, they've made at least the Elite Eight in both seasons, and he played 35% of the minutes 2 years ago and 25.4% of the minutes this year. I'm not even sure he'll get that many minutes at IU, just depending on how things go with the front court. But again, he'll be able to give you a bit of a different look, a bit of a different style, depending on what that game calls for. Do you agree with that as being, kind of part of the value and probably part of what the staff is looking at here, is just kind of a different type of backup than what you're going to get from Sparks?
Yeah, absolutely. The stats don't stand out. But his face-up game, and we've mentioned this all the time with the threes and the fours. Do you have multiple dimensions to your game? He has a capability of driving, and he's not afraid to shoot the basketball. It hasn't been efficient doing that, but it does, for a 10 or 12-minute guy, those skill sets can be improved, and it does give Woodson some flexibility in what he's running. And you combine that with the guy who wants to be here and is willing to play that backup role. From everything we're hearing, that's the case, that he's willing to come in here and work. He wants to experience the Big Ten. He wants to experience Assembly Hall and what Indiana has to play. Those are things that we really should admire in the young man. But he's going to provide good backup minutes with a variety of things that he can do. But he's not going to shoot 35, 40% from three, and he's not going to average double figures. We didn't get that kind of guy. But we got a Hoosier who wants to come in and help Indiana win and has some ability to face up from the 4 and from the 5, which Indiana has not had in recent years. So I think that's the thing that impresses me the most about him. But you got to understand, it's not going to come in and be a 30-minute guy, 10 to 15-point guy. He'll average 3 or 4 at best, but he'll hit some shots and he'll defend and play and bring some toughness off the bench when he's needed. And I think that's a good addition, because you can't add all starters because you got to have the right mix. I think your comment about the right type of mix and different ways of playing is something that's hard to understand as a fan. But I think you need different people with different attitudes and different spots. And I think this young man is a veteran, and I think he fits that role.
Yeah, there were really, there were two concerns I had when we first started talking with him and he came in for the official visit. One is kind of what you just talked about. A lot of times when you have a grad transfer coming in, and they've already played at a high major school, and especially one that's been as successful at Miami, like it's not like he's leaving a school that hasn't won so he can try to win. Miami's been very successful. Your concern is, okay, is this guy looking for a bigger role? Does he want to score more? Does he want to go back to, the minutes played that he had as a sophomore? But, clearly this guy has been around. He's a 4-year player. He can look at the roster and see what Indiana has and be wide-eyed coming in, and kind of understand what the role is going to be. And, with our coaching staff and everything that we've heard about Woody, what do we always hear about Woody? He's not going to BS you. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. And so it doesn't make any sense from Walker's perspective or from the staff's perspective to be making him a lot of big promises about playing time that are going to lead him to come in and be upset and be a chemistry issue. There's just, and that was a concern for me, but there's absolutely no reason to think that's the case. So, okay, we can cross that off the concern list. The other one for me, and we're going to have to see how this plays out, is what does his presence potentially do to Caleb Banks? Because you look at Peyton Sparks is a 5, right? Peyton Sparks isn't going to be taking any Caleb Banks minutes. Anthony Walker is really, a guy who can probably go down and guard 5s as an offensive player, probably is more of a traditional 4 type. How does that impact Caleb? Because I think we all think, Caleb has some skills that can make him a 3, some skills that could make him a 4. What makes him valuable is his potential ability to go back and forth between those spots, depending on how big Indiana wants to play and depending on how much his perimeter game develops. Obviously Caleb and CJ didn't put up big numbers as freshmen, but certainly everybody on our show really believes in their potential. So does Anthony Walker come in and does he take, some of those minutes from Caleb at the 4 that would have been important developmental minutes for Caleb? Look, Woody as a coach, he understands the importance of keeping the positive momentum going, winning as many games as possible, getting to the NCAA tournament. He's had a history of siding with veterans over younger guys. And so to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to prioritize Walker's playing time, over Banks. Even early in the season, I think you've got to prioritize getting Banks his 12 to 15 minutes so he can develop. That coach to me is, kind of I think everything else makes sense to me, and I don't have big concerns because I just don't have huge expectations. I don't think Walker is coming here to be a stat sheet stuffer. He's here to be a depth piece on the floor and in practice, and I think he profiles to be that. My only concern is if he ends up taking away minutes from Caleb Banks in November and December, I think that's something that could set him back a little bit and potentially set the team back in February and March, where hopefully you get that early development and then he comes around. So that is kind of my only lingering concern about this as we move forward. And there's really nothing that we can do about that except just kind of state it and think about it. But we're going to have to watch and see how that plays out in November and December.
Yeah, and I think I said Thursday, if you think Caleb needs to play some 4, that is a concern. It is a legitimate concern. But I believe Caleb is more of a 3 in the long run. And so I don't see that as an immediate problem. And the thing is, too, is as much as I love Caleb Banks, he's got to show that he's ready. And you've mentioned a lot of times, too, that with these transfers, you want to see good college production, and you know that they're not going to match that production from small schools moving to big schools, but you want to see that college experience production, and that's where Walker, that's his plus. We don't know yet if Caleb could survive and play at the 4, backing up Renew to the level that Woodson wants. Maybe we're a little more comfortable, or the staff is, with Walker. But I just think that Caleb Banks is more of a 3 in the long run, and our lineup is going to start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you see someone like Caleb Banks playing the 3, and you have Renew and Walker playing the 4, that's the prototype of roster and starting lineup that you're going to see. Same with the Mabako guy coming in. I see him more as a 3. And both Banks and this Mabako guy are the type of players that can slide down and play 4. But that, again, just adds to the flexibility and the diversity of attack that we didn't have in the last couple of years. And that just makes Indiana better in the long run.
Yeah, Caleb's going to be an interesting one because for him, like the size, the measurables, the athleticism, it's all there. And that gives him the flexibility to play the 3 or the 4 physically, just depending on, what kind of lineup you're looking for. The big key for him is, obviously his ball handling has to develop and his shooting has to develop for him to be, a reliable threat from the 3. Until then, he's really more of a 4 guy that can come down, get, energy buckets, get rebounds, that kind of stuff. Now, I think he played a lot of that way in high school, and was a scorer and faced the basket and handled the ball. So it's not as much of a stretch to say Caleb can play 3 as it was for a guy like Jordan Geronimo. It will be interesting to see how quickly that comes around this season. That's what we don't know. And that's where I think we don't want to, enter the season banking on Caleb Banks to play the 3. You want to get a guy like maybe an Mbako or somebody else who can do that. But I do agree, ideally, he is a 3-4 type. He just needs minutes, to get on the court. So that's a thing for me to watch. I would say for those of you who are concerned looking at his stats, Anthony Walker's stats, I mean, I get it because I look at the stats. I wouldn't say I'm concerned so much as I'm over or underwhelmed. Now, part of that is having a week to process this and kind of think it through, but I think you look at some of his shooting numbers, not great. You look at his assist numbers, not great. Even his rebounding numbers for a guy of his size, they really dropped off this year. The last 2 seasons, he was a much better defensive rebounder. His rebounding, dropped off. His defensive rebounding percentage this year was 10%, which was, less than Xavier Johnson's. But I'm just not sure, honestly, that those stats matter all that much because he's not a guy who's being brought here to score. He's not a guy who's being brought here to create. He's a guy who's being brought here to defend, certainly to rebound. So the rebounding is the one that you really want to see go up. But, he's a guy who's been able to defend without fouling. He doesn't have a very high foul rate. And I think the other thing to look at is, he does get blocks and steals. Not overwhelming numbers, but at least the kind of numbers that when he comes in, maybe he can change a couple plays by getting a block here, by getting a steal here, being that disruptive defender. That is one of the things that we're losing with Race Thompson being gone. And so that is, one of the things as we look at these depth pieces, I want to see, are they disruptive defenders? Walker's numbers don't bowl you over, but that is at least something that he's been able to do, get blocks and get steals, and that kind of helps him in the role that you're asking him to play. So I think it's important to put his numbers in context. I mean, based on his history, he probably will go out there and take a few threes at a very low percentage, so that's just probably going to have to live with that. But otherwise, I'm not as concerned about the scoring numbers because I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be asked to do that much. And if he gets a little over his skis and is taking more shots than he should, then hopefully that'll be reflected in his playing time, and that's something that obviously the coaches will talk to him about. So, it'll be interesting to see in a new context, on a new team, and a new roster, and a new offense, how productive he is. I'm just not as worried about the offense because I don't think that's why he's being brought here. Coach, what does this recruitment tell you about the kind of roster that Mike Woodson is trying to build? And just kind of overall what we've seen with the 11 scholarships that are filled right now, what are you learning about the way that Mike Woodson wants to build a roster when he doesn't have an All-American anchor kind of dictating his choices for him?
And maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but the guys he's bringing in, short of sparks, have a little bit of face-up game at their position. And I think that's where we all want Indiana basketball to go, and it seems like that's where Coach Woodson wants to go. Yeah, Walker didn't shoot the three, extremely well. But I do think he has some skill sets that are a little different than Race Thompson. And when you talk about stats, Race Thompson, we loved and played a lot of minutes, and he didn't shoot the three very well. But he did a lot of the intangible things. And we're not asking Walker to come in and replace Race Thompson. We're asking him to come in and play the backup for 10 or 12 minutes with Race Thompson-like, stats, at least shooting from the outside type of things. So, I just think he's trying to get long and athletic and get some guys with experience. And I just think it's headed in a good direction. I know this isn't a splashy. Sparks and Walker are not splashy gets. And everyone wants that top level portal, type transfer. But we got him in there. We just need to get that guy on the wing and that dead eye three shooter. And we're going to get there in the portal that are exciting right now that Indiana is in contact with, that 2 weeks ago, everyone was thinking about Connect and Ledlum, and now there are new names in. So I think what it tells me is that, obviously Coach Woodson and staff have a plan. They want to win at Indiana basketball, and they're trying to put together a roster. And really what our best thing we can do is just continue to talk about these individuals and where we think they fit in, and then wait until we see the entire roster. But I think we're going to get more athletic and more diverse. That's what the recruiting is telling me. How the top end talent of all of that, I think Woodson has some issues with Indiana not being a winning program for a while, and Woodson has some problems with the dominant post presence with TJD offense that he has on tape for 2 years, that he's got to really sell a different pattern. But I think he wants to head in that direction from the guys that he's talking to and trying to bring in.
One other thing from Walker's KenPom page, just to kind of flag, is, they break it down a lot. They have your overall production, and then they break it down on there by conference only, and then how you did against tier A and B teams. So basically the best teams on your schedule. Last season, Anthony Walker, overall, his offensive rating was 93.7, which is, not very good. That's not very efficient. In conference play, in ACC conference play, it was actually 108.8. And so that obviously is much better, but also probably a number that needs a little bit of context. The ACC was not very good and had a lot of teams that were not very good last year. And so if you actually look at his numbers against tier A and B competition, so the best competition that Miami played, both in the NCAA tournament and the regular season, all of his numbers actually took a pretty big dip. His offensive rating in those games was 64.6, which is very much not good. Now, that is a big dip from, as a junior, it was 89.3 against those really good teams. As a sophomore, it was 86.9. So historically, he's been better, but he is a guy who both his offensive production and even his rebounding has taken a bit of a dip against better competition. So just something to flag. And again, the context of this one is important. I don't think he's, if everybody stays healthy and everybody develops how we think, I think this is a guy who, you think about, the role that Michael Durr played when he was here. And there were games where Michael Durr didn't play or just played a couple minutes and didn't have a big impact. But there were also games when you needed him because of foul trouble or injury, and you were very happy to have him. And the production wasn't always great, but there were times that just his length and activity on defense was very helpful. That is how I would think about Anthony Walker. And so I just don't, I know, seen, some comments from people like, I don't get this one, I don't like this one, all that stuff. And I think he's a guy that he's just, if everything goes well, he's not going to have that big of a role anyway. But if we need him, we're going to be really happy to have him. And that's kind of how I would look at it. And I think a lot of his value is going to come as much in practice and in the locker room as it is, everywhere else. And that's the important thing to keep in mind here is we can look at stats, we can look at film and try and think about how this guy fits on the court for the 40 minutes that we're watching basketball. And that is important. And I think there are very fair questions to ask about that, which we have asked, here on this show. But the thing to remember, Coach, and you can speak to this, is a player's overall impact on your program isn't just those 40 minutes, right? This is a team that needs veteran leadership. Anthony Walker is a veteran who's been around and can provide some of that. And you need good athletes to go up against in practice because it's not going to help Malik Renew get a whole lot better if he's just able to physically dominate the guy that he's playing in practice. If you've got a big 6'9" guy who's played 4 years in a major conference and has been in the NCAA tournament, that's a guy that's going to provide, some good competition in practice. And so I think for a player like this, who's more of a depth piece, that kind of stuff matters and is part of the value. And I know it's part of the value the coaching staff is looking at. And so, again, I think you probably got to, peel the layers back of the onion and think a little bit deeper on this one than just the stats. Khalil Ware, you look at it and it's like, whoa, 5-star guy, McDonald's All-American. All right, slow motor, whatever. I see the value here. Peyton Sparks, yeah, efficient offensive player. Okay, he's not going to start, but I can see how 15 minutes a game, he can come in and give you that, the toughness and the hustle and the rebounding and the scoring. I see that. Walker, it's not quite as obvious. And again, there are questions, but I think some of those other deeper areas that we won't even see on the court are part of what the staff sees as the vision for this recruitment. Can you speak to that from a coaching perspective, and do you agree with that, I guess, and think that that's enough to make this kind of a worthwhile get?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with it because roster construction takes on a lot different look when you're inside the coach's office than when it does when you're sitting on your couch as a fan putting stuff out on Twitter, whether you like something or not. And I love Indiana fans. I love all fans, and we're all passionate. But roster construction from a coach's standpoint, you got to have the right fit 1 through 13. And if you get that, you're very fortunate. But you cannot have 13 5-stars on a roster because you're never going to have enough basketballs. You're never going to have enough playing time. And it's going to be hard to shuffle a lot of those type of talented players. So you go out and you have a plan on what you want for each position. And I think it speaks volumes for Coach Woodson that he wants hard workers with some skill as backup players that want to be at Indiana. And those things don't show up in the stats. So, the coaching staff sitting there and, they wouldn't have entertained this guy on a visit or made him an offer if they didn't think he would fit the role for the position that they want. And that's where your context comes into play. It's not about the stats. Walker probably is a better fit for the 3rd or 4th post player on Indiana's roster than someone from a school who played post, who averaged 17 points a game, got 10 rebounds, played at Old Dominion, and would be a little more splashy on the statistic page. This is where you have to trust the staff, and until it is proven that it was a bad decision, you have to believe in the staff because they know what kind of personnel they want. And then to add to a guy who wants to be here, a guy who's willing to accept his role, is worth many, many points that might not be on his stats, as opposed to someone who's going to come in here, wants to start, you play him in the backup, and now he's unhappy in the locker room. So, yes, I have to – this one is a trust the Woodson and staff get on this one, because they know what they want in people, and they know what they want in backup positions. And I think it's a good get from a winning program.
Yeah, I agree. That's why ultimately, after some early misgivings, I think the first thing I texted you guys when I heard about this doesn't make much sense to me. And I think thinking about it more, talking to some more people about it and what the coaching staff's vision for it is, it does make a lot more sense to me. So we'll see. I think the other thing that Mike Woodson and the staff have done over 2 years is they've built rosters that have good chemistry, and that do have pretty good role balance overall, I think, in terms of, guys who are able to accept roles even with, limited minutes. Now, not always, and I think we had some guys transfer who maybe weren't as excited about their role as others, but I don't think those guys were problems during the season. I think overall Mike Woodson's been able to sell guys on their roles, get people to buy in, and have pretty cohesive rosters with good chemistry. And so that concern, I think, until it's proven, to not be the case, I think it's fair to trust them a little bit as we go there. So a couple other things here that we'll hit before we get out of here, Coach, because I have some lawn work that is just waiting for me to do here on this Saturday afternoon. I saw someone in the chat, I think it was Edub, say, I hope this doesn't affect the recruitment of Mbako. I can say with 100% certainty that it will not. Those are two guys really that would have two different roles. Mbako would be brought in here to be a featured scorer, even from day one. Now, maybe he would struggle with that role as a freshman and things would change, but that would be the vision for him coming in, is you're going to step in and start probably at the 3, be a guy that we're going to look to get shots for, and that is totally different from Walker. So I don't see in any way that affecting that recruitment. And that is the other thing to remember here. Some of the reaction I've seen from some fans, I think they look at the Walker recruitment, as somehow working against Indiana's clear need to get some impact wings. This doesn't affect that at all. Indiana had 3 scholarships to go. There was some thought that Indiana might carry only 12 scholarships into the season, and we'll see. That might still be the case if they can't find 2 wings that are going to be impact guys. But they still have those 2 open scholarships, and that's, they were only going to take 2 wings at most anyway, so nothing has really changed there. This is just really the staff kind of being opportunistic with a big that has experience that wants to come here and saying, yeah, we'll take your leadership, we'll take your experience, and let's come be a part of this. So it's not going to affect Mbako. If Indiana is able to, kind of start moving the ball down the field with Dingle from Penn, it's not going to affect that. Same thing with Ray J. Dennis from Toledo. Look, Mbako has a visit scheduled, so I think and frankly, I think, some of the chatter on that one is starting to be more and more positive that Indiana has a real shot. And so I think that one is certainly worth paying attention to. Dingle and Ray J. Dennis are worth having on your radar, but let's wait and see if there are Zoom meetings and, official visits and all that stuff. But Coach Walker is not going to affect those guys. But clearly what Indiana needs next is they've got to find impact wings. Because you look at the roster right now, in terms of, kind of lead ball handlers, Indiana has X and then Gabe Cupps, who's going to be a freshman. You've got Trey Galloway that can step into that ball handling role, but really he's more ideal in kind of a wing, role where he's not initiating the offense, but can be a secondary guy. You've got CJ Gunn, Anthony Leal, Ja'Kai Newton, and then Caleb Banks, who can really, kind of go between that wing role and even slide down to the 4. And then you've got your bigs in Kalel Ware, Malik Renew, Peyton Sparks, and Anthony Walker. And so, Coach, it's pretty clear now what the entire focus of the rest of this offseason is going to be for Indiana, and that is find wings who can be dynamic offensive players. Probably at least one who is close to, if not a knockdown shooter, and then someone else who hopefully can be, a 2 or 3 level scorer and really, challenge the defense in a number of ways, and possibly even have, some ability to step in as a lead ball handler if X is in foul trouble, or you just need someone else in that role. So that really is going to be the focus now for Indiana moving forward.
Yeah, they have to get scoring from the traditional 2 or 3 spots. Again, we talk a lot of positionless basketball, but you need those wings that can shoot and drive, and hopefully you get one that can do both. And the interesting thing is, Jerod, is everyone was a little bothered by not getting Ledlam and Connect, and then all of a sudden some names just pop in that are really exciting. And there's no guarantee that Indiana is going to get the Dingo kid or the kid from Toledo or Mabaco. But all of a sudden now there's more excitement, and that's what we want to talk about. Is these coaches know who the wings are that are out there that fit the Indiana ideal roster under Coach Woodson, and they're in contact with them, and they'll get them on campus if they can and try to sell them as best as possible. But there is no doubt that the post position is pretty set. You have Caleb Banks who can slide down the floor. If you end up getting a Mabaco, you got another guy who can slide down the floor. So you have some multi-dimensional 3-4 type players on the roster. You got to get a guard that can just fill it up from outside. And ideally we'll have some ability with the bounce as well. But if you get one, I think that's really good. That could start and be an impact player. You might get a second one that is a streaky shooter that can come in against some defenses or be in the second unit and add some offensive punch too. So I think we at least get one starter type wing, but I'd like to get two, unless they want to hang on to a scholarship, which I don't think is a bad idea. If you believe you can develop some of those guys like CJ Gunn and other players that are currently on the roster.
Now, there was another piece of Indiana news that came out today. It wasn't just the commitment of Anthony Walker, and we will talk about that news here in just a second, but I do want to make sure that we discuss our presenting sponsor here on this emergency episode. That's right, folks. This emergency episode of the Assembly Call, like all episodes of the Assembly Call and all content on the Back Home Network, is brought to you by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where it seems like every weekend now they are rolling out either new schools or brand refreshes. I saw today they dropped, I think it was a brand refresh for Cincinnati. They did West Virginia recently. And I don't care about Cincinnati. I don't care about West Virginia. And I thought some of the designs were awesome. That's the fun thing about Home Field Apparel. Even schools you don't care about, they have such cool designs, and they've got materials for every season, whether it's T-shirts, whether it's a crew neck, whether it's a hoodie. They've got something for everybody, and they just keep adding new schools, and so it's high quality stuff from a company that you can trust and that came up from the Kelley School of Business, like so many of us, and so we really appreciate their support, and we love supporting them. So go to homefieldapparel.com. You can use our promo code HOME, HOME, and you will get 15% off your first order. That's homefieldapparel.com, promo code HOME for 15% off. Coach, last thing before we get out of here is we got some important scheduling news today. I saw John Rothstein tweeted, and then Rocco Miller and some other people confirmed that Indiana and Auburn are going to be playing a game this year. It's going to be on December 9th, so it's essentially going to take the place of the Arizona game in last year's schedule. It'll be the weekend before Indiana hosts Kansas, and the game is going to be in Atlanta. So, I don't know exactly what name they're going to call it. I would vote for the Zach Osterman, Kent Davis Classic. But, an interesting game, Coach, from a couple perspectives. One, it's a game against a program in Auburn that, has been a little bit up and down, but they've, been a top 25 level program, in recent seasons under Bruce Pearl. And it's good experience against a team that is going to feature the kind of style and the kind of athletes that has typically done well in March. And so that'll be a good measuring stick game for Indiana. But I think the context of having a game in Atlanta is really important, with Coach Yaw's connections down in Georgia and, just the amount of high school basketball talent that comes out of there. And plus, Indiana's got guys from that area on the team now, Ja'Kai Newton, Caleb Banks. This is a nice way for those guys to go play close to home and for Indiana to continue to strengthen its presence, down there in a place that is pretty fertile from a recruiting perspective. So a lot to like, I think, about adding this game to the schedule. What do you think about it?
Yeah, these are games that Indiana needs to play, and I do agree. The game in Vegas was fun last year. You got to go play those in different arenas, and it is good to be seen in many different places around the country because you want to get athletes from where the best players are. And Atlanta has sent us a couple players that have been good to the program. So it's just the type of scheduling that Indiana needs to do from here on out. You had a couple of nice ones in Kansas and Arizona last year. You'll have Kansas again this year. I'd like to see one more top-level game be scheduled somewhere. We do have the Louisville, Texas, and games in New York City. Those are games that Indiana should be playing. They can't play 11 of them in the offseason because you got to have some games for other purposes and some bye games for the home schedule. But yeah, I thought that was a really good piece of information coming out today.
Yeah, so Indiana is in that. What's the name of that invitational that's going to be, or the
Empire State
Classic
Games or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Empire
so
Classic,
that's with, UConn, Texas, and Louisville. So that is going to be a 2-game event. So there will be the initial matchup, and then the winners will play and the losers will play. So that's obviously going to be a high-profile setting against at least 2 teams that are projected to do well. Who knows what Louisville is going to be like next year. Kansas is Kansas. And then you look at Auburn. In the last 6 seasons under Bruce Pearl, here are Auburn's finishes in KenPom, starting with last season. 32, 12, 60, 33, 11, 23. So, in 5 of those seasons, that's an NCAA tournament-level team on a neutral court. So it's the kind of game, Coach, that we like, because if you happen to lose it, it doesn't necessarily hurt you, but just the fact of playing it helps you. And certainly if you win it, that's a nice little notch on your resume. So, it's a good game for Indiana to be in. As you said, you can't play all games like this, and Indiana also announced a game with Harvard this week. And so the non-conference schedule is really, shaping up nicely. And Indiana needed some games like this because the ACC Big Ten Challenge is going away, and obviously Indiana doesn't project to be playing in the Gavitt games. So this now, Indiana's, certainly going to have 3 games against top 25 level teams, assuming that UConn and Texas are both good this year, and potentially 4 if they end up playing both of those teams, or if Louisville, is at all decent after they cratered last season. So it should be an interesting one, and obviously the location, playing in Atlanta. Indiana's got a lot of alums in Atlanta. I see Lisa here in the chat. She's going to be there. So that is all awesome and very good. So a good day for Indiana basketball. Again, I understand if you're looking at the stats, it's easy to wonder how Anthony Walker fits in. And I shared some of those very concerns. And I think there are still some things to have questions about, and we have to see, how it's going to play out. And I don't, I think, one lesson here is from Anthony Walker's history, he's much better in a more limited reserve role than if he has to get overexposed, as we saw in his sophomore season. And so you like having him there for depth, but if for some reason he ends up playing 50, 55, 60% of the minutes, something has probably gone wrong. He's not a guy who you want doing that, but if he's a guy that you're getting for 5 or 10 minutes a game that can be a big depth piece, help you in practice, help you in case of injury, and come in and provide sparks, because he is athletic and can make some plays, I think he's able to add some value there. So I would just, urge you to have an open mind, maintain your questions, because I think a lot of them are fair, but I think this one you have to dig a little bit deeper to understand the vision, as opposed to just trying to plug and play him in the rotation like we would do with a guy like Dingle or like we did with a guy like Ware. I just don't think that's really the right way to view this one. But, when viewed properly, I can see the vision, and now we'll have to see if that vision actually plays out, because talking about it in April in the offseason is one thing, but seeing it actually play out is another. And so I think, Woody may have to suppress his own desire to default to seniors for this to work out the right way. But if he does that and Walker plays the role that it seems he's well suited to, then I think this makes a lot of sense, Coach. And then, any final thoughts on Walker before we look ahead and then close up?
No, I just think I'm looking at it from a guy who wants to be here and is going to accept his role and has some ability to play and be productive from a 10-minute role. And you need somebody like that on a roster of 13. So, it's not a season changing or whatever, a major addition, but it's an addition that I think will benefit Indiana in the long run.
Yep. Yeah, it is not a it's not a commitment that changes Indiana's ceiling at all. It is a commitment that I think you'd fairly say slightly raises the floor.
Yeah.
Because again, depth pieces, that stuff all helps out if you run into a rash of injuries or stuff happens. It's nice to have a 6'9" good athlete who's played on good teams that you can rely on. So I think that's a better way to look at it. As we look ahead, Coach, Mackenzie Mbako scheduled to visit Indiana next weekend, May 5th through the 6th. He is visiting St. John's now. I'm not sure if his visits to Louisville and or Kansas have been scheduled. So that is the big thing now to look forward to, is that visit. Obviously, we'll talk more about that as it happens. More importantly, hopefully that visit goes like this one's does, or like this one did. A nice weekend visit, and then the next day, let's get that graphic out there and commit, because that would be wonderful for Indiana. So we'll keep our eye on that. The last thing, Coach, before we go, Jordan Geronimo announced his transfer destination today, and he's staying in the Big Ten. He's playing at Maryland, which is an interesting choice for Jordan. I really wondered, given his desire to play the 3, if he would try and take a step down, from the Big Ten level, maybe go to the MAC level, or even, someplace a little bit lower, be able to play the 3 where his skill level and athleticism would allow him to have a little bit more success doing that. Certainly more consistent success that he had at Indiana, but he's going to Maryland. And so I think, all of us, are disappointed that it didn't work out as well for Jordan as we hoped. But I think everybody, I didn't see almost one negative comment from an IU fan in Jordan's post. I think everybody's really wishing him well. Wish that it had worked out better here. It didn't. Hope it works out better for him at Maryland. But I can't say I'm confident that will happen, just because he's still in the Big Ten, and it seems like it'll probably be more the same for him. So, hopefully whatever Kevin Willard's vision works out a little bit differently than it's worked out here at IU. Wish him well, but what are your thoughts on him at Maryland and what that fit may be like for Jordan?
Well, it was a little surprising after we talked just about this question. There was a good question on Thursday about where he would land. And I don't know Maryland's roster and where they, what their needs were. But it was a little shocking because Maryland made a nice run last year under Willard, and I thought they were headed in, that direction of a positive uptick. And I don't know that he changes that much for Maryland. But again, we always just want him to be successful. We wish it would have worked out, but he's a 4 in my mind. And he's not a 3. And unless he really gets moving, I think that's going to be a struggle in the Big Ten. But again, wish him everything but success, except the games that we play him. So I hope he struggles in those games.
in those 2 games. Isn't it interesting, Coach?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if any Maryland fans are listening to this 48 minutes into an emergency podcast about Indiana basketball, I honestly feel like the analysis for Jordan at Maryland is probably similar for what we're talking about now with Anthony Walker, where it's like, hey, this guy isn't really being brought in here to be a featured player, but he's had some big games. He's a good athlete. This is a guy who's going to help you out in practice. He's been a very positive influence, in the locker room by everything that, that we know about him. And so really, I feel like Maryland is probably looking at him, if they're smart, to play a similar role to what Walker is going to play at IU. I don't think you want Jordan to be overexposed because he just doesn't have the depth of skill necessary, to consistently produce when he's playing 15 to 20 minutes a game. But he is a guy who we've seen in spurts and flashes and in the right matchup can have a big impact. And it's never a bad thing to have a guy with his level of athletic ability, there if you need someone in a pinch. Like Indiana needed someone when Race Thompson got hurt earlier this year, and it was kind of the one time all season when Jordan kind of knew what his role was going to be, and he played pretty well in those games. So, there's certainly some upside for Jordan that we all wish had been more fully realized here. But I'm guessing for Maryland, for the Maryland podcasters who are doing emergency podcasts and trying to paint the optimistic picture, for where Jordan fits, it probably sounds pretty similar to what we're talking about with Anthony Walker, I would think.
Yeah, he can find a niche, I think, that 10 to 12 minute role. I just, it's shocking because if I were him, I'd want to go someplace where I'd have more of an impact. But again, maybe that's heading back closer to home, and there's other factors that we aren't aware of. But again, I just wish him nothing but the best. I hope Maryland doesn't win the Big Ten title, and they go. Do we play them twice next year? I think we do, don't we?
I believe we do. Yes.
Yeah. So 0-2 against us, and like third behind us in the conference, and Geronimo has a good senior year.
That's right. That's right. No, we wish him well. I hope he has a final good season. I hope he got himself a little NIL bag, as part of transferring from Maryland, because I know they have a pretty good NIL infrastructure, and he's closer to home. So I'm sure a lot of those things factor into the decisions. There's always a whole lot that goes into it. But wish him well. More importantly, we wish Anthony Walker well. Hopefully for those of you who have listened, we tried to really contextualize what the vision is for this, what the potential questions and the potential pitfalls could be. But I can't get worked up, over this one in a negative way like some people have. But there are some curiosities I have about it, and what his role is going to be. And as I said, hopefully he doesn't take anything away from Caleb Banks' development, because I think as we look at storylines for next season, I think the number one is get back to the NCAA tournament, third straight season, start to make that normal. That, it kind of solidifies that the floor for this program has been raised. I think that is absolutely the number one thing that has to happen next season. And then from there, you try and build on top of that. And obviously you want to compete for the Big Ten and make a tournament run and do all those things. Indiana's ability to do that will be dictated, I think, in part by who else they're able to get out of the portal. But not too far down that list in my mind is the development of C.J. Gunn and Caleb Banks. I think those guys, they're the type of guys that you want to be ready for a more featured role as juniors and seniors, but they're probably going to have to go through a few ups and downs this season to get there. And I just want to make sure that they're given the playing time to do that. So that's my big question about this one. But I think other than that, it makes a lot of sense for Indiana in terms of the role he's being asked to play. So that's our thoughts on it. Coach, anything final before we wrap up here? God, that was a quick hour. That was 52 minutes. That went fast.
Yeah, no, I ran into Phil Samuels today at the baseball game. Always good to see him and talk to him. So I think he's got a picture he might be putting on. I don't know why he wants a picture with me, but always good to see Assembly Call fans out and about in Bloomington and other places. And I met Phil's wonderful wife. And it's just all good, people. It's all good. Indiana basketball's been in the tournament for 2 years. We're headed in the right direction. And the transfer portal is crazy. It is up and down, up and down, up and down. And there are different pieces that are filled by the transfer portal. So hang in there, be excited, be disappointed, but ultimately, just continue to have that patience, because we're 2 spots away from having a podcast, Jerod, on where we could really, analyze the entire roster and the job that the coaching staff did. I think that's when we really can start judging Indiana's efforts in the transfer portal.
Absolutely. All right, Coach, thank you for being here on short notice. I appreciate it. Yep. Thanks to everybody who's here live. It's always so nice to be able to throw these up randomly and see so many of you join us live. We really, really appreciate it. Makes it fun. By the way, Tony has an important question. Did Phil buy a round of drinks?
No, his wife offered, but I had to drive home at that point. It was like the 5th inning. But I did buy Phil ice cream.
Okay, good.
So I did buy him some chocolate mousse ice cream. So I bought Phil some ice cream. He was going to pay me back with a beer later, and then time just got away from us. But, Phil's not as cheap as he seems. He's a pretty nice guy. So he's not the cheapskate that we all think he is, to be honest.
We love Phil. All right, Coach, get home safely. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm about to hop out and mow the lawn. And appreciate everybody being here. And
see you, everybody.
We will have plenty more on this, plenty more in the transfer portal moving forward here in the offseason. So thanks for being here, everybody. As always, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.